is PBS.
Celebrate the 4th of July at the United States Capitol this year. With Ricky Skaggs and the Chieftains, Eric Kunzel conducting the National Symphony Orchestra, and a fireworks extravaganza you don't want to miss.
Tune in Tuesday night at 8 on WETA.
In a world where danger waits behind every shadow,
they're young kids, 12, 13 years old.
There lives a monster.
Kids are terrified of him. They won't go against him.
I won't testify, and you can't make me.
And only Jane Tennyson stands between him and his next victim.
The man who did this will pay for it, I promise you.
Oh, my God. You think I had something to do with that?
But when the line between good and evil begins to blur, where can she turn for help?
I don't want her or us to have anything to do with this murder.
Are you telling me not to interview my prime suspect's main alibi?
Helen Mirren returns as Jane Tennyson.
If you take me off this case now, I'm warning you, I won't go quiet.
Don't make threats, Detective Chief Inspector.
Prime Suspect 3.
Watch back-to-back episodes Thursday night at 9 on WETA.
Oh, my, you sure did look pretty, Miss Leslie. You always did look pretty. Just pretty not good enough to eat.
This is a nightly business report news brief made possible by Chubb Group of Insurance Companies. For over 100 years, providing business and personal insurance worldwide through independent agents and brokers.
I'm Paul Kangas. More mixed signals on the economy out today as Americans' personal income fell 0.2% in May, while personal spending rose 0.7%. Meanwhile, construction spending declined 1.5% in May, the biggest drop in 4 years. On Wall Street, in a shortened trading session ending at 1 p.m., the Dow Industrial Average today gained 29 points, while the NASDAQ and American exchanges both rose a little bit over 1 point. Eastman Kodak stock gained 1 3/4 today on word the Clinton administration will launch an investigation into Kodak's allegations that it has lost billions of dollars in film sales in Japan because of unfair trade practices there. For more financial news, tune into the Nightly Business Report weekdays on this public television station.
Major funding for Charlie Rose is provided by the people at DuPont, originators of products and ideas that make a difference in everyday life. DuPont, better things for better living. And by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and the annual financial support of viewers like you. Charlie Rose is also made possible by these funders.
Welcome to the broadcast. Tonight, a conversation with Steve Forbes of the Forbes magazine empire about running for President of the United States.
We have a chance for the most extraordinary economic boom in this country's history. We have a chance for the first time in almost a century to help affect an international environment where trade can grow, democracy can grow, and we're throwing away those opportunities.
And 2 authors of recent books looking at Europe today.
A lot of people in Eastern Europe thought the West was perfect purely because their government said that the West was hell. So whatever their government said, you believe the opposite of. And they really expected that overnight things would turn into Hollywood.
And Charles Jenks on the architecture of the future.
On a computer, you can design curved buildings, for instance, as almost as cheaply and efficiently as rectilinear ones. Now, you think of New York City, which is basically a gridiron city built on a grid and vertically on a grid. That's the quintessential modern city. But now imagine if New York City were based on warps and twists and waves.
The politics of 1996, Europe after the fall of communism, and the future of architecture when we continue. In 1940, a little-known but powerful businessman named Wendell Willkie defeated his party's old guard to win the Republican nomination for president. Steve Forbes, the president and CEO of Forbes, editor-in-chief of Forbes magazine, and the son of the late Malcolm Forbes, knows Willkie's story and may decide to follow in his footsteps. Why would Steve Forbes want to run for president? Is something missing from the current crop of Republican aspirants? I'm pleased to have the man here to talk about how he sees the politics of 1996. Welcome.
Good to be here.
Willkie is a guide for you. I mean, here is, I think, a lawyer turned businessman from Wall Street who...
And who was a Democrat until a few months before the 1940 convention. But it was a unique period in American history and Western civilization, and he was ahead of the curve. His party was isolationist, he was internationalist, he was pro-growth. His party was still stuck on tariffs and anti-growth policies of the early 30s. So against all the odds, he got the nomination. He lost the election, but got more votes than any Republican before and up to 1940-52.
And what does that say to you?
What that says is that an outsider coming in, there are periods where an outsider can bring more to the political table than perhaps the experienced politicians can. I think we have that period in 1996. The political class, I don't think, realizes the extraordinary opportunities that lie ahead for this country, and they're not fully addressing the obstacles that stand in the way of realizing those opportunities.
And when you say political class, do you include the whole cross-section from the right, Gingrich and Dick Armey, and people who fashioned the Republican majority in the House, all the way over to the presidency at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue?
I would include the president, who's been a very real disappointment in the last 3 years. On the Republican side, I would include so far the Republican candidates. I'd make an exception for the two names you did mention, Gingrich and Armey. Gingrich understands ideas.
Yes.
He knows the importance of occupying the high ground, but he's not running. Dick Armey has come up with a tax plan, among other things, that I think is absolutely fabulous. And if I ended up running, I'm considering it, I would certainly run on his flat tax platform.
More about that later. He will eliminate a graduated income tax, a progressive income tax, have a flat tax.
Do away with the whole thing and start all over again. And I think the American people are in a mood for it in this post-Cold War world, starting all over again on the tax thing.
Willkie for a second. Is it doable that someone can come from outside, and some reports say you'll spend up to $10 million of your own fortune to make the race? Is it doable in 1996 when you look at the head start that Senator Dole has, when you look at Buchanan on the right, when you look in between Graham and Alexander, to find a base to beat those candidates?
Well, we have over 35 primaries. The voters will make that decision. And so I think it's eminently doable because they realize that the policies of the last 40 years of the Cold War period are not appropriate for the transition from the Cold War era to the new era that we see ahead, and I think that millions of voters sense is ahead. It's like you have an Olympic runner ready for the gold medal run, but you have a 200-pound pack on that runner's back. Get that pack off, get those weights off, and we're off to the races. So I think the people sense we're not doing as well as we should, and I think that's why there's so much unease about the economy and where we're headed.
Does this mean that you find Senator Dole, Senator Graham, former Governor Alexander, and commentator Pat Buchanan less than desirable as Republican nominees?
I think they would all be better than what we have now in the White House, but I don't think they're addressing the opportunities and the needs that people sense for 96. We have a chance for the most extraordinary economic boom in this country's history. We have a chance for the first time in almost a century to help affect an international environment where trade can grow, democracy can grow, and we're throwing away those opportunities. And if we throw away those opportunities, we're going to all pay a severe price.
We're throwing away those opportunities, notwithstanding the fact that Republicans now control the House of Representatives and the Congress, and the Senate?
The Republicans are starting to make some substantive changes on domestic policy, but so far they've punted on international policy. They blew it on Mexico. They've blown it on our trade talks.
You in opposition to NAFTA?
No, I was very much pro-NAFTA.
And then how did they blow it?
But they blew it in terms of going along with that disastrous policy of last December where we encouraged Mexico to devalue the peso and set off a severe crisis that is going to lead to millions of people trying to cross the border. Mexico's going into a depression, and our exports to Mexico have plummeted. Cheapening your money, trashing your money is not the way to get ahead. When the administration went along with that and encouraged the Mexicans to take that drug of devaluation, the Republicans should have said, this is nonsense, this is the wrong thing to do. but they just let it go by.
Give me another alternative you favor that you don't find anyone on your side of the political fence advocating today in terms of the international sphere.
Well, I think that somebody like Jack Kemp had an understanding of it. Somebody like Jeane Kirkpatrick has some understanding of it. But I think you have to meld not just the traditional diplomatic military side, you also have to realize the extraordinary role that economics plays, not in terms of trade disputes, but in terms of creating an environment where other countries can get away from the clutches of our Treasury Department and the International Monetary Fund. We are giving advice to these countries that qualifies as economic malpractice. We could have prevented the hyperinflation in Russia. We could have prevented the disaster in Southern Europe. But we blew it, and we blew it in Mexico.
Okay, let's go down the list. And how have we blown it with respect to Japan in terms of the very firm stand that this administration has taken with Japan? There is some kind of, today as we talk, agreement being hammered out. It looks like that the Japanese have blinked, at least in terms of some kind of voluntary agreement from Japanese automobile manufacturers agreeing to use auto parts from other places.
Well, the Japanese auto manufacturers were quite willing to do a voluntary agreement weeks ago. In the name of free trade, and this is something, again, the Republicans didn't pick up on, in the name of free trade,
the president in terms of his
absolutely.
tough talk.
Because they looked at focus groups which said people don't like the Japanese, so they weren't willing to stand up against the president on this. But in the name of free trade, Bill Clinton is giving more power to bureaucrats to tell companies where to buy stuff and where not to buy stuff. It's called managed trade, which is socialism light. If we want to open Japan's markets, we can do that through a NAFTA-like agreement, through a free trade agreement. Why hasn't anyone, there are a few congressmen who've done it, but no one has put on the table the seemingly futuristic idea, instead of these ongoing trade disputes, why not go for a free trade agreement with Japan? Why not sweep away these obstacles? Now, people say, well, the Japanese would never do it. Well, Japan is in crisis today. Their political system's in crisis. Their banking system is collapsing. They're in a recession. The mood of the voters is for reform.
All right, but
so you look ahead 5 years.
Okay, let's assume you're right. Wouldn't the Japanese, if they were willing to engage in that kind of NAFTA free trade agreement, have put that on the table themselves rather than facing the catastrophe they face
right now,
if, in fact, these tariffs take place?
But right now, you have a discredited regime in Japan. The people are turning against it. At the very same time they're turning against it, we come across with a proposal that would put more power into the hands of a discredited bureaucracy in Japan. That bureaucracy, we wanted them to have power to tell their private companies how much to buy from which company. That's not free trade. In the name of free trade, Clinton simply used that as a way of winning back votes of union members in the Midwest. They could have...
You don't think Clinton believes in his own policy then? Do you think it's simply a political ploy and
yes, it was opportunistic.
Not good economic sense?
If he wanted to really open up the Japanese market, there are other areas, Kodak and Federal Express and other areas in agriculture and financial services where substantial progress can be made. He simply picked that and did it in a confrontational way for politics.
But, Mr. Forbes, you seem to suggest that the Japanese are completely willing to 100% engage in free trade because they would be willing to accept a NAFTA kind of agreement if it was put on the table. And there's no evidence in the history of these negotiations that they want a complete free trade. They want to, through a series of...
Charlie, if you want something to happen, you have to take the lead and bring people along. When Ronald Reagan proposed a North American free trade agreement 15 years ago, people said, that can never happen. That's outlandish. It took 6 years to get an agreement with Canada. It took over 10 years to get an agreement with Mexico. But far-sighted leadership means you go beyond the current focus group and say what is best for the future, and you start laying the groundwork for it now. And it won't happen now, but 5 years from now it might happen if we start now.
What about Bosnia? What would you do?
Well, first of all, you take off the arms embargo. The Bosnians are quite willing to defend themselves, just as the Afghans defended themselves against the Russians when they finally got some good weaponry. The Bosnians can do the same. And when they do, then the aggressing Serbs will realize they can't do it by aggression, and you might be able to get an agreement.
And if it puts the UN troops there at risk,
the UN is doing more...
withdraw them?
Yeah, they're doing more harm than good. they're in effect providing a shield and providing hostages for the Serbs to continue their genocide, continuing to shell these cities with civilians.
And would you use American troops to help rescue and evacuate those UN troops?
You would not put, there's no need to put American ground troops in.
To help evacuate, not in terms of using as an offensive force.
You put them in, and it's very hard in that region, in any region, to get them out.
Let me talk about domestic economics. You favor what kind you have been involved with Christine Whitman, the governor of New Jersey, in terms of her proposal and her tax cut proposal, which helped elect her governor in her most recent election. You also have given some advice, I understand, to Governor Pataki, who will be making his own tax cut proposals here in this state. What is it you would do with respect to tax policy on the national level?
Well, you first of all realize you have to begin, what is the greatest obstacle to creating better jobs, to doing all the things we want to do? It's our monstrous tax code. You couldn't, as a human being, couldn't consciously devise something more horrific, more deadweight on the economy than that thing. So scrap it. Start over again. Start with a clean slate. Put in something like Dick Armey's flat tax plan. Do away with all the 400 deductions so you don't spend 6 billion hours a year filling out the tax forms, $300 billion complying with the tax code. So if under a flat tax, a family of 4 would pay no federal income tax on their first $36,800 of income. Anything above that $36,000 level would have a flat rate of 17%. There'd be no personal tax on investment. That would get this economy going. You'd have a low tax rate, which would provide a lot of incentives. You'd have a greater pool of capital. You could actually fill out your tax form on a postcard.
And if you made...
productivity, imagine all that brain power, all the brain power that goes on this deadweight, unproductive tax code would be released to do something productive for the economy. And it would remove corruption. Look at all the political contributions that are made to influence the tax code. It's undemocratic. It's immoral. Scrap it.
What do you think of the idea of eliminating the income tax and not having a flat tax rate, but some kind of national sales tax, as proposed? I think